Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. We'll just give everyone a few more minutes. I can see people joining the room, and then we'll get started. Okay, I'm going to get started and we'll have a few more trickle in as we go through. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's LMA webinar, Amplifying Relationships and Business Development Through Coaching. I'd like to thank our programming season sponsor, Key Media, whose brands include L'Expert, Canadian Lawyer, and In-House Magazine. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do this, so we thank them very much for that. Today's webinar is designed to be interactive. You'll be asked to take some polls and to post questions and to answer questions using our chat box function. We also encourage you to ask questions as we go through the session, which Carmelo will address. Just type those in the Q&A box, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Carmelo Milimachi. He is a professional certified coach and founder of Attune Coaching and Consulting. His coaching practice is focused on leadership development, team engagement, career fulfillment, and business development. Before he started his coaching practice, Carmelo worked in law firms. He's been where we all are. He worked at Osler and Norton Rose and was a business development and marketing leader in those organizations. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Carmelo. Thank you, Carmelo.
Great, thanks, Catherine, and hi everyone. As you're joining, yes, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, maybe for some of you, maybe not. Thank you for joining this session. A few things before we get started. Actually, let me share my screen to make sure that's all working. Let's get that going. Assume. Maybe Catherine, you can give me a note, a confirmation.
Yes, we can see that. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Just give me 1 second to set this up. Yeah. So a few things going into this session today. One is, as Catherine noted, we will be making this interactive. So although we can't see you on screen, I am going to encourage you to use the chat box to provide some thoughts. Answer some questions I might have for you. Please engage as much as possible, because we want learning from each other as much as you might get some learning from me. And we will have an opportunity for Q&A at the end of the session. But I encourage you to please, as we're going through the content, please ask questions in real time so I can address it in the moment. On that note, please put the questions in the Q&A so that it doesn't get lost in the mix of conversation in the chat. So general conversation in the chat, specific questions in the Q&A. I will monitor that as best as I can over the course of this conversation. Catherine will interrupt me if I'm not answering a question, and so we'll get to it, or we'll get to it at the end if you have questions at the end. And as we go through this conversation, I really want you to put on a few things. Put on the mindset of, how can I take what I'm hearing? Not everything is going to resonate with you, but how can I take bits and pieces of content that we're going to go through and discuss in terms of coaching and using coaching to amplify your relationships in BD, and how does this apply to my role? I'm looking at the attendees as you're coming in. There's a mix of people. There's a lot of you that I know. Hello to those that I've worked with in the past, whether in-house roles or as a coaching consultant. So please engage in this dialogue. I want this to be as interactive as possible, but we do have quite a bit of content to go through. So please put on that hat of where's the learning for me and how does this apply to my role and where I am right now. The questions we will answer during the course of this conversation are: what is coaching? Which coaching competencies help to deepen relationships? How can you use coaching? How can you use a coaching approach in business development and marketing? And what role does mindset play in coaching? So a bit of a definition of coaching for those of you who have not worked with a coach, or specifically worked with a coach who's trained through the International Coaching Federation, which is my designation. The ICF defines coaching as partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. And so there's a couple of things I want to highlight here as we go through this conversation. Coaching as partnering with clients, let's convert clients to coachee, and coachee in the context of the work you do can be a lawyer, a legal professional, your team members, your leader, someone in another business unit. It could be anybody in the firm that you're working with. So let's consider clients, the language around clients, to be coachees, anybody that you're working with. And of course, what we're going to specifically focus on here is the professional potential. You will notice that as we go through this conversation, coaching absolutely has the power to transform your personal relationships as much as your professional relationships. We are focusing on the professional relationships over the course of this conversation. And just digging into coaching a little bit more, what is it, what isn't it, and what isn't it? And there's a clear distinction between coaching, consulting, mentoring, advising. And so we're gonna unpack that a little bit. But what I want to say around coaching is there are a few key elements of coaching that I want you to consider in terms of how this might apply to the work that you do. One is that as a coach, we consider, in coaching mode, we consider everybody that we're speaking to as creative, resourceful, and whole. And so what that means at its core is the individual that you're speaking to already has the answer in themselves. And so we just need to create the space. We need to support them and challenge them to be better versions of themselves, or whatever it is that they're aspiring to do in terms of an objective. We simply need to create the space for them to reveal that creativity, that resourcefulness, that wholeness. It means that they have the answers, and we simply help them to identify their current state, identify their desired future state, and get to that point. What that ultimately means is it's their agenda, not ours. And so that can be a little bit of a shift for many of us on the call in terms of how we work internally with our lawyers, our colleagues, our teams, our leaders. It's whenever we're in a coaching mode, whenever we're in a coaching conversation, it's about the agenda of the individual you're speaking to, not our agenda. So important for us to shut off our agenda. In coaching, we also look at what we're doing is we're coaching the individual's relationship to the issue, to an issue, and not the issue itself. So ultimately what that means is you don't actually have to have subject matter expertise in whatever you're coaching someone on. You actually have to have the coaching competencies that allow you to coach someone's relationship to the issue. And so we'll talk about that a bit more, because that might not seem obvious. And really importantly in coaching is we do not give advice. And I'm going to take a breath there and say, I know that that's going to sound counterintuitive to a lot of what you're expected to do. And so let's unpack that a bit. But I really want you to also look at coaching as a layer on top of what you already do, and using it as a way, as we say, to amplify your relationships in BD, not as a full replacement of what you already do. So let's dig into a little bit of the distinction between coaching and what I would assume most of you on this call, I believe, are in marketing or BD roles. You have a very specific subject matter expertise, or maybe for some of you, it's I'm a generalist, I get approached about everything. But that's the sort of left side, the advisor side of the work you do. This is where your hard skills, your technical skills, your subject matter expertise, whether it's in BD or marketing, whether it's event planning or sponsorships or writing proposals or developing business plans with your practices, your industries, or your offices, or whatever that might be. That's your hard skills. This is the advisor side of you, where you are expected to, and you should be able to advise on the best approach in executing an initiative, in responding to a request, in dealing with a project, in collaborating with people on your team or otherwise. The advisor space is, I like to say, the advisor space is the doing space. So what are you doing and how do you do it? That's the advisor space. The coach space, or the coach mode, let's say, is a lot more focused on the soft skills. So the interpersonal relationship, the relationship side of whatever it is you're doing. So this is where subject matter expertise is not as important as the coaching expertise. And we're gonna unpack some coaching competencies, of course. That's the intention of this conversation. So the difference between coaching and advising is where in advising, you are advising on the best approach. As a coach, when you're in coach mode, you're inquiring about the best approach. Very different in that what you're doing is, as we say, we're partnering with your coachee, whoever that might be, to develop the best approach with them, deciding what the best path is to get to that ultimate goal, whatever the desired future state is. So this is, I like to say, the coaching side of your role might be more in the more being space. How are you presenting yourself? How are you being when you're doing? So the question I like to ask in this space, not necessarily for you to answer, but for you to contemplate is, how are you being when you are doing what you do? So how are you presenting yourself? How can you be in coach mode when ultimately what you have to do is provide advice and provide subject matter expertise? So I want to take a pause there and note that I think what's important is, again, I want to reiterate this. This is not a suggestion that you modify your advisor space. You are expected to provide expertise and advice in your particular area. It's the cost of entry in the work you do. It's what the firm hires you to do and pays you to do. It's what your colleagues and your leader expect you to do. The question for me is, how can focusing a little bit more on the soft skills, on the being, and collaborating with someone enhance your advisory skills? Even if you're in a junior role, how can you start to think about this in terms of, how do I bring in some of those soft skills? And maybe some of you are doing that already. Like I said, I'm gonna monitor the chat and the Q&A just to make sure nobody's asking any questions. Again, please put your questions in the Q&A as we go along. All right, let's get into our first poll. So when you look at this screen, you've got the advisor side of you. Maybe one or more of you have the coach side of you. Let's do a quick poll. I see something in the Q&A. How do you know when you are moving from advisor to coach? Is it a feeling or how the client responds to you? Thank you, Ruth. We're absolutely going to get into that. So I'm going to show you we're going to explain some tactics in terms of how you move into coach role, initially at least, and then supplement that, or have that supplement your advisor role. But I'll answer it quickly, say that you know that you're in coach mode when you're inquiring versus telling. So if you're telling, if you're directing, if you're guiding, if you're saying to someone, this is what you must do, this is what we need to do, you're in advisor mode. If you're more inquisitive, what's the best approach? What do you think we should do? How should we approach this? You're more in coach mode. That's just scratching the surface of it. Okay, let's take a quick poll. So given what you see in terms of advisor and coach, in your particular role, you are most often engaged as what? So let me just call up this poll and get us to take some time to complete this. So please take a minute just to answer this. There's no judgment, whether you're advisor, coach. There are no right or wrong answers here. Let's just get a few more people to respond. Maybe 10 more seconds to fill in the poll. All right. I think we've got as many as are going to contribute. So this is really interesting. Let me share the results and hopefully you can all see that. All right, so 55% of you are in advisor mode most often, 45% in coaching mode. Awesome. That's actually really encouraging to see that almost half of you are at least initially in coaching, inquiring, not advising mode. So I will look for that 45% of you to contribute to certainly to contribute to the conversation around the coaching competencies. Okay. So there are, when it comes to the International Coaching Federation and coaching competencies. There's a lot to discuss there. Particularly when it comes to coaching competencies, there are several. There are 8 core coaching competencies, and within those 8 core coaching competencies, there are, in some cases, dozens of subcategories. All that to say is we are not going to go through all of the coaching competencies. We don't have the time. That requires a lot of unpacking. And so what I'm doing for the purpose of this conversation is taking out of those core coaching competencies 4 key coaching competencies that I see as the most valuable in terms of, particularly for those of you who are in professional services, and I think that those are most of you, and specifically in legal and specifically in BD and marketing roles. These are the 4 coaching competencies where even before I didn't have this language, I noticed that they were key in my role, whether I was internal initially, and now certainly from an external perspective as a coaching consultant, I see the importance of these competencies and the way I approach my clients, and then ultimately how my clients approach their work internally. So again, we're going to only cover 4 coaching competencies, and even within these 4, there are several subsets of this. So we're going to scratch the surface of it, but really get into some deeper conversations around what each of these means and how they might apply for you. Okay, so we are going to cover the 4 key coaching competencies being, number 1, cultivating trust and safety in your conversations and your relationships, maintaining presence when you're in conversation, listening actively, and evoking awareness. So let's dig into a few of these. Cultivating trust and safety. Really what this is about is your ability to create a safe and supportive environment that produces ongoing mutual respect and trust. Let me take a pause there. I think I see a Q&A, a question in Q&A. I find I gravitate to coaching, but I'm often reminded what they're looking for is advising, absolutely, which means I feel I'm not providing what they're looking for. Sometimes I feel like I am being pulled back because I don't want to find myself in an uncomfortable situation. So, anonymous attendee, we might have to unpack that a bit more and see what your specific question is. But what I would say is gravitating towards coaching initially is what I'm recommending here. It's not always going to be something you can do. As I'm sure many of you experience, what I used to experience, and I still do, is someone coming to me, let's say a legal professional coming to me and saying, this is what I need, let's get it done. And in those moments when I did go into coaching mode, it might not have been appreciated because what they were looking for was get to the point, advice mode, let's go, let's get going. But what I encourage you to think about is, even in those spaces where the expectation is for you to be in advisor mode, is even if you take a little bit of time at the front end to go into coaching mode and try one or more of these 4 coaching competencies, the benefit will be for not only for the individual that you're speaking to, but particularly if you're speaking to a legal professional, ultimately for their clients, their prospects, their referral sources, their outside networks. Sorry, follow-up question. I find that often lawyers prefer coaching rather than advising as they have their own opinions of what is right. Yes. How do I successfully convert coaching to advising when I have proven information to back up my suggestions? We're going to dig into, so I'm actually going to present a few scenarios, and maybe in those scenarios, we can actually talk about how do you successfully convert coaching to advising. Because I actually do believe that in most of your roles, now I don't know what each of your roles are, but where you are in BD and marketing, there is a requirement for you to have, like I said, that subject matter expertise and be able to advise based on your experience, based on the team's experience, based on research, based on whatever it is, education, whatever your platform is in terms of subject matter expertise. There is an expectation that you do that. So you do need to switch into advisor mode at some point. But it's how you make that transition that we'll talk about in some of the scenarios that I'm going to present later. And if I don't answer that question, come back to me and say you haven't answered that question. All right, so cultivating trust. I think I already read this, but let's go through it again. Ability to create a safe and supportive environment that produces ongoing mutual respect and trust. This is really the foundation. It's really not, I mean, if you think about this, this isn't the foundation of simply professional relationships. Of course, it's the foundation of any relationship. But in the professional space, I notice that sometimes we can not overlook this, but bypass it a little bit too quickly. The need to cultivate trust, to create a foundation of trust and build safety in a relationship that you have with someone is really the foundation to being able to apply not only any other coaching competency, but also for in advisor mode for your whoever it is that you're speaking to want to listen to the advice or direction you're giving. Because if someone doesn't trust you, or if you don't trust someone, think about it that way. If you don't trust someone, if you don't feel safe with someone, how likely are you to take their advice, let alone allow them to get into coaching mode and feel like you're in a collaborative relationship with them? It's probably not going to be there. So this is really the foundation of it. And what's really important in this space is the way we build trust, the way we build trust in someone else often is the way that we'll expect them to develop trust in us. And one of the things I say is make sure that when you're building trust with someone, you're putting on their lens, not yours, because the way someone else builds trust might be or can be entirely different than the way you build trust. So it's important to understand what trust and safety means to the individual, because what it means to you might not be what it means to them. So let's get you jumping into the.
Carmelo,
Yes.
before you go on, could I just ask you to expand a little bit on that and how you know how somebody else builds trust? Is it something that you ask, or is it something that you in tune from their behavior? I'd be interested to know a little bit more on that.
Yeah, both, Catherine, absolutely. And actually it might be leading into the slide in terms of how you develop trust, because I want everybody to sort of contribute to the conversation around how you do that. So please put your thoughts in the chat box. How do you develop trust? Excuse me. We want to share as much as possible here. I'll kick this off and encourage everybody to contribute. So a couple of ways that I do it is, one is not make assumptions around what that looks like for someone. So when I say ensure that the way someone else develops trust in you is the way they develop trust in you is by asking. You might not ask, well, how can I build trust? That's an awkward question, right? How can I make you trust me? I can't imagine that feels comfortable to ask, and you don't have to. So to me, it's about inquiring. So it's about being in a space, and we'll cover this in terms of active listening, presence, and questioning. It's about being in a space where you are completely focused on the other person, what's important to them, how they prefer to engage, what their conversation style is, knowing more about them. Are they an introvert, extrovert? What are their preferences in terms of the way they build relationships and build trust? And so one of the things I do in this space is I don't make assumptions around what the other person is thinking or feeling. And so, I try, I should say, I don't always get this right. I try to not make assumptions around what someone else is thinking or feeling. So to me, the way I turn an assumption into fact is by having a conversation, is by creating that safe and supportive and challenging environment where I'm able to ask questions and start to build trust and have someone understand that, I'm someone where you can feel safe in having a conversation. Oops, I've got, I think this is a question, or I develop trust with responsiveness. Absolutely, Joyce. Always being able to answer, even if it's asking for time to find the answer, and being willing to invest over time. Absolutely, responsiveness is definitely a way to build trust. And in fact, for those of you who do work with legal professionals and have access to outside counsel, or in-house counsel, or client relationship intelligence and feedback, one of the biggest areas of improvement and biggest opportunities when I used to do feedback programs is responsiveness. You'd be surprised how many times clients said, I can't work with you because you're not responsive. That was the feedback I would receive about the legal professionals that were on a file or on a client team. Let's get some other people. Well, how do you develop trust? Let's put some thoughts in chat. Nobody, no ideas? Too difficult a question to answer? Absolutely, being prepared, yes. Transparency, yeah. Respect, honesty, right? A lot of these things seem obvious and intuitive, and yet accountability for sure. You know, one of the things I ask in this space is, how often do we think about this? How often do we actually stop and think with the individual we're speaking to? And this can be outside of coaching mode as well, but particularly in coaching mode where cultivating trust and safety is important, is, you know, does this person trust me? Do they trust me enough for me to be their advisor? Do they trust me enough for me to be their coach? Listening, experiencing, confirming what they have told you, active listening, absolutely. Listening and providing information they can rely on. Listening, a lot around listening, absolutely. We're going to cover that. Okay, thank you. Second coaching competency, maintaining presence. This is really about your ability to be fully conscious and create spontaneous relationships, employing a style that is open and flexible. Here's another space where we probably don't often think about how am I presenting myself? And I don't necessarily just mean physically presenting, although that absolutely does have an impact on your ability to coach someone or advise. So what does your physical presence look like? I don't just mean how you're dressed. I mean your energy, your presence, your attitude, how you're sitting in a chair, how you're standing, how you're engaging in the physical space with someone. And then there's also the maintaining presence in terms of your own energy, your own internal dialogue, because it's not just about presence external, it's about your presence internal. So what are you telling yourself internally that is creating the energy, the space for a coaching conversation? Because again, a coaching mode is different than advising mode. Advising mode being, I'm telling you what to do. Coaching being, I'm going to make this a collaborative conversation to understand what you think is the right path and how you're going to get there. That requires a different type of presence potentially than just here's what we do, here's how we do it, let's get going, versus engaging in a dialogue where the other person is creating that thinking on their own. You're creating the space for them to answer that question on their own. That requires a little bit of a different presence in terms of your energy and your ability to sit in that space and be willing not to bring your own agenda into it. Because recall that I said, in a coaching space, you are not bringing in your agenda, you are not fixing. The coachee is creative, resourceful, and whole on their own. And oftentimes, if we are constantly in advisor mode, which many of us are, I'm telling my lawyers what to do. I'm telling my team what to do. I'm advising, I'm guiding, which is absolutely valid. It is hard to switch out of that and go into a conversation and not have your agenda present itself, not have your style of advising present itself in a coaching scenario. So your presence in that space is very important. So again, I'm going to ask a question here. Let's get into the chat box. What do you do to be fully present in your conversations? So put in some thoughts. I'll tell you what I do. Specifically right now with my current clients, before I go into any conversation, I get clear about, you know, what's if I'm in coaching mode, what do I know about the situation if the situation has been presented? What do I understand in terms of past conversations where the client might be, the coachee might be, and how can I bring my best self to this conversation? It's almost a little bit, I almost get into a little bit of a meditative mode to a certain extent in order to bring my full coaching mode into a conversation. And that applies virtually or in person or by phone or however that presents itself. So I see some chat activity here. How do you do, or what do you do to become fully present in your conversations? Take notes during the conversation. Yeah. Put down your phone. Yes. Shut off all physical distractions. Responsive, again, absolutely. I think about the other person, how they are, how's their work going. Be thoughtful in my response, absolutely. Understanding and taking as really important their thoughts. Eye contact, repeat snippets, yes. Mirroring to confirm that I'm understanding what they're saying, yes, absolutely. Eye contact. So there's a mix of physical presence and the internal presence, right? Responsive, thoughtful, engaged. Any other thoughts on how you maintain presence? Another thing I would suggest, particularly given the situation we're in, is in terms of conversation format. This is really a time to ask what someone's preference is. With a lot of, I'm seeing a lot of conversation around, let's meet for coffee, let's meet in person, and I am perfectly fine with that with my clients. If I wasn't perfectly fine with that, I might feel uncomfortable saying that I'm not. So I do the reverse. When I'm suggesting a conversation or a meeting, I will offer, does in-person work for you? Virtual is perfectly fine as well. So part of presence is knowing what format works for that individual. And frankly, you can see working backwards, that also cultivates trust and safety. Okay, listening actively. I know you've heard this before. You've probably talked about it. What does active listening look like? So let's dig into this a bit, because this to me is, for me as a coach and maybe as a person, is one of the most important tools and one of the most difficult in my view. I certainly have not figured this out. I'm in work in progress. It is one of the most important things for me to grasp. So let's talk about this a bit, because active listening at its core is your ability to focus completely on what the other person is saying and not saying. That's a really important piece. To understand the meaning of what is said in the context of the person's desires and support self-expression. I really want to highlight that piece around what is someone not telling you, because this is where active listening can be really powerful. Oftentimes it's in what they're not telling you that some core information is being held. And so active listening requires you to sit in that space and draw out of them what they're not telling you that actually would benefit the conversation. Okay, so let's do another quick poll. How would you rate your listening skills? Again, there's no judgment here. However you rate your skills is just what it is. So take a few seconds to rate yourself. Recall, this is anonymous. Let's give it a few more seconds. We'll close the poll in a few seconds. Just get your last comments in. And here we go. Share the results. Hopefully you can all see those. So 12% of you are excellent. Excellent, great. 70% of you categorize yourself as good in your listening skills, 16% average. Nobody's poor. I expected that, given all the roles that you're in. So what I want to encourage you to think about is, as we have this conversation around active listening, is what does this mean in terms of how I can improve, or what's an aspect of active listening that I didn't quite understand. But this sort of tracks with sort of typical results. Okay. 3 levels of listening. If you've heard of these, great. If you haven't, if you've heard of these, it's a reinforcement. If you haven't heard of these, this is a perspective on 3 levels of listening. And so let's talk about this. Level 1 listening is listening for how it applies to you. Level 2 listening is listening for what advice you can provide. Level 3 listening is listening for what the person is and is not saying. So you can see that where we're getting to is level 3 listening truly being active listening. And so you might look at this and say, I don't really understand how does this apply to situations. So let me actually unpack this in a scenario that you might have experienced, you being on the receiving end or you being in conversation with someone. So let's just imagine a scenario where you're chatting with a colleague, or maybe it's a friend or your partner or whoever it is, and someone you know was up for a promotion and they didn't get it. So you're having a conversation with them over coffee and they say, I didn't get that promotion I was after. So that's the conversation. Hey, what happened? Did you get it? No, I didn't get that promotion. So you're just finding out. Level 1 listening is, the way you might answer that is, that's terrible. My day was bad too. You should hear what happened to me. So how it applies to you. You had a bad day. Let me tell you about me. Same scenario. You're chatting with someone and they say, I didn't get that promotion I was after. Listening for what advice you can provide. Level 2 is exactly that. You providing advice. Maybe you should quit. Find a job where you will be appreciated. They don't deserve you. Right? So that's providing advice. Level 3 listening, same scenario. I didn't get the promotion I was off after. Level 3 listening is, what is the person saying or not saying? So you might say in this space, I know how hard you've worked to get that promotion and how important it is for you to be recognized for your accomplishments. How can I support you right now? So level 3 listening is what's the undertone here? You know, you're upset. You're probably upset about not getting that promotion because of how hard you worked and you haven't been recognized. And what's important in level 3 listening is a question, embedding a question in there in terms of how can I support you right now? Because what the support might be, level 2, they might tell you, I need some advice on what to do. So you might jump to level 2 and give them advice. But I would always say that in level 3 listening, which is true active listening, is don't jump into level 2 providing advice unless that's what they want. Because also think about this from your perspective. How often have you been in conversations, professional, personal, where someone jumps in with advice and that's not what you wanted? You wanted a sounding board, you wanted someone to hear you, and then providing advice actually derails a conversation. Or reverse, how many times have you done this, right? Think about where you've done this, where you've jumped in with advice, where you've jumped in with your agenda, and that might not be what the individual is looking for. Again, this is not to say that advice giving is inappropriate. It's just knowing the space where it is appropriate, and if you're not sure, asking. I would argue that level 1 listening probably never serves anybody. And if you want to challenge me on that, please put that in the chat. If you think that level 1 listening applies at any point, please tell me. I've never seen it work. Okay, so given those 3 levels, one final poll, we're almost there. I would like to get a sense from you in terms of when you're in conversations, how would you rate your listening skills in your conversations? Where do you most often sit? Level 1, how it applies to me. Level 2, what advice I can provide. Level 3, what they're saying or not saying. Okay. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so 5% of you are at level 1 listening, how it applies to me. 59% are what advice I can provide, which is not surprising. That's usually the majority. And 36%, which is healthy, are listening for sort of active listening, what they are saying or not saying. So again, I want to encourage you to think, if you are in level 1 listening often, how can you at least move to level 2 listening? So getting out of reaction, how does this apply to me? And at least getting into level 2 listening. But I really, of course, in this conversation, if you are in coaching mode, it is essential that you're in level 3 listening, because again, it's not providing advice. In coaching mode, you are creating the space for someone to reveal what they need to reveal in order to understand their future state and how to get there. Sorry, I don't think I showed the results, did I? There you go. 5% level 1, 59% level 2, 36% level 3. Okay, I love this quote because I think it summarizes active listening really well. Imagine someone listening not only to your words, but also to what's behind them, who even listens to the spaces between the words. Someone in tune with the nuances of your voice, your emotion, your energy, who is intent on receiving everything you communicate. Someone who listens to the very best in you, even when you can't hear it yourself. That's pretty powerful to me. And it's definitely aspirational for me. That's a challenging space to be in, but that's level 3 active listening. All right, fourth and final coaching competency is evoking awareness. So this is your ability to integrate and accurately evaluate multiple sources of information and to make interpretations that help the client to gain awareness and thereby achieve agreed upon results. This is another core coaching competency that you probably do often and you just haven't categorized it this way. One of the things I think is really important in evoking awareness is a subset of that is powerful questions. So how do you evoke awareness? I'm giving you one way to do this is powerful questions. Powerful questions being your ability to ask questions that reveal information needed for the maximum benefit to the relationship. Here's a space where we often, we might, if we jump to advisor mode, we might not necessarily be asking questions. Powerful questions, asking questions for the purpose of evoking awareness in your coachee is what's going to give you a lot of the other things in terms of trust, if they're the appropriate question and not intrusive, building trust, building safety, active listening. In asking a really powerful question and active listening, you're going to get a lot of information. Presence, being able to ask powerful questions as they relate to the individual you're speaking to, not necessarily your agenda, their agenda, can really create the presence and the space for someone to reveal a lot more information than they normally would. And so let's get into quickly maybe some comments in the chat again. What are some of your most powerful questions? So where you have been in coaching mode, in an inquisitive mode, what are some questions you've asked that you find powerful? Let's drop some of them into the Q&A or into the chat, sorry. Anyone? Any questions you ask of your lawyers if you're working with lawyers or your team members? Why do you think this is a good idea? Yeah, what would you tell a client in this situation? Yes, absolutely. What do you define as success? Yes. What does success look like to you? Absolutely. What is the ultimate end goal? What are your end goals? Yeah. Couple of things around questions. One is, and you've all done this. Let me just scroll through. Absolutely, you've all done this. Number one is open-ended questions versus closed. Why do you think your clients chose you? Absolutely. Open-ended questions over closed-ended questions. So as much as possible, use open-ended questions because that creates more dialogue versus closed yes or no answers, because then you have to probe the yes or the no. Start with an open-ended question. The other thing is, and this is, so here's no judgment of any of you that wrote the why questions. Why questions for some can be interpreted as judgmental. So I'm going to use that last one as an example, not to single anybody out, but why do you think your clients chose you? Maybe a different way to look at this is when you're giving more sort of challenging feedback, why did you do that? That's one way to ask. Another way to ask that same question is, what made you take that approach? For some, it's a subtle difference. For some, it's a little bit more than subtle. The why feels like, why did you do that? A little bit more judgmental than a what question. So I would encourage you to shift your why questions to a different format, where possible. One really important thing, excuse me, before we jump ahead. One other important thing in questions is silence. Whenever you ask a question, be silent after that. Even if, I've been in several scenarios and maybe many of you have experienced this. If you ask someone a question and they answer, I don't know, our tendency is to immediately jump in and reframe the question, ask another question, move on, and not leave a lot of breathing room. Silence after asking a question, and in fact, silence in a lot of coaching is one of your most powerful tools as well. So the next time, for example, the next time you ask a question of someone and they answer, I don't know, I'm going to encourage you to sit in the discomfort of being completely silent. Because oftentimes, what I find is if I remain still, presence, don't fill the space with anything, what someone will do is say, actually, now that I'm thinking about this, here's something that's coming to me, or here's some things that are coming to me. So if you're quiet, you're giving them the space to think through a question that they don't know. And the way I now interpret I don't know is, I don't know to me means I've never thought about it, so give me some room to think about it. And I'd like to hear your thoughts if you do this in the future. I don't know, remain silent until they continue the conversation. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get someone who in their thinking, in their thought process, is going to brainstorm some great ideas. Treat I don't know as an opportunity and not as a roadblock. Okay, just checking the Q&A, we're good. So let's move to, so four core coaching competencies, excuse me, creating trust and safety. Geez, I'm blanking. Let's go back. The 4 coaching competencies: cultivating trust and safety, maintaining presence, listening actively, evoking awareness. I want you to think about where you can use one or more of these 4 coaching competencies, or maybe all 4 in your practice, in your role going forward. And even if you just choose to focus on one of them, I'm gonna choose to ask some very powerful questions the next time I'm speaking to someone, or I'm gonna choose to think about my presence. Focus on one, develop that skill set, and go from there. And you'll start to see naturally that you'll get different results with the conversations that you're having when you're in conversations with, whether they be lawyers or your colleagues or your leaders or team members. Let's talk about mindset really quickly. Mindset is an important piece of coaching because it's, as we define it, it's a habitual pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. It provides a frame through which we see and experience the world. It shapes what we believe the limitations and possibilities are for ourselves, others, in a situation, and it defines our choices for acting and shapes our outcomes. So one of the things I want you to consider is, when it comes to mindset, there are a couple of different mindsets we can think about here. One being, it's a different way to interpret advisor versus coach. So are you in a fixer mindset or server? Fixer being telling someone what to do, how to do it, do this, do that. It's important to consider. So the fixer mindset is you jumping into advisor mode and fixing the situation or advising on the situation. The server mindset, being a little bit more leaning towards coach, is asking someone how they want to be and what behaviors will get them to their ideal states. These are the powerful questions. What do you think you should do? What's important to you? Some of the questions that many of you put in the chat box. There is, again, I want to reinforce, there absolutely is a role for the fixer in your roles and in many aspects of our lives. I'm just suggesting that maybe you jump into server mode, be inquisitive, be collaborative before you jump into fixer mode. Another set of mindsets to consider are the judger mindset, the learner mindset. The judger mindset being someone who's focused on what's wrong, whose fault is it, how can I stay in control, how can I manage this appropriately, versus the learner mindset, which is what's right, what am I responsible for, what are my choices? So questions that lean more towards learning versus judging. Again, judger mindset might not be bad. If you think about a courtroom, you need to be in judger mindset, right? So there are spaces for these different mindsets. I'm just encouraging you to think about how your mindset can support you in a coaching role. Okay, let's in the balance of time we have together, let's dive into a couple of scenarios that you might have encountered, or you probably will encounter in the future if you haven't. So scenario number 1, how many of you, I'd like to hear in the chat, how many of you have experienced this? I'm meeting a contact and need marketing pitch materials to give them. Please pull something together. This is typically coming from one of your lawyers. And so what does this mean in terms of coaching versus advising? Of course, the advising space is being able to pull together these materials, pull together the right information, the right boilerplate, the right practice descriptions, the right bios, the right accolades, all those things that are important to being able to pull together pitch materials of some sort. Here's a space where I would encourage you again. So what does coaching look like? Before creating the pitch materials, consider if another approach would better serve the contact. And I want to highlight something here. I said better serve the contact, not the lawyer. Because I think that in certain scenarios, your role, and this is where your role, bringing in a coaching mindset can support you. Your role is to represent your clients externally more than it is to represent your lawyers internally. And that might not be a comfortable space. So that's something to work on. But I used to do this when I was in-house, and I certainly do this now, is, I'm going to ask you questions. I would set this up to say, I'm going to ask you questions about the situation for the benefit of the person you're meeting and not necessarily for what you think is appropriate. Because if I don't put on that lens, of what's best for the person you're meeting, I'm not going to serve you in having an effective meeting. And the way I'm going to do that is move into coaching mode before I start to do the advising mode, which is pulling the pitch materials together. So again, powerful questions. You know, this is about creating presence and space and trust and all those things and listening actively. But here, I'm just going to leave these on screen and look at these and tell me what you think. Some questions you might ask in this scenario. You know, before we pull together some pitch materials, what do you know about the contact? What's important to them? What are their core issues, opportunities? Or what do they need to know about you and the firm? This is a way to get them to think about what pitch materials are we pulling together and why is this relevant? What's relevant about pulling together pitch materials at this stage? What does your contact need from you in this meeting? That's a powerful question that I've asked, because typically the answer is not necessarily, well, pitch materials. What they need is to know me better and for me to know them better. So next question, what is your intended outcome in this meeting? Oftentimes what I used to hear is, my intended outcome in this meeting is to get work. That might not be realistic at this stage. So maybe, what if your intended outcome in this meeting, so this is creeping into advisor mode somewhat, what if your intended outcome in this meeting is for you to learn as much as possible about this contact so that you can have a follow-up point? And then maybe you can produce pitch materials as a result of this meeting where you, lawyer, were inquisitive and collaborative in your conversation with this contact. So what do you want to know that would help with follow-up? And one of it, so here again, jumping into advisor mode, here's where, okay, you know, pitch materials might not be the right thing. So what if we do some research to see if we can start to answer some of these questions with some public-facing information? So maybe some of this information is available for us to ponder before you go and meet with your contact. So why don't, maybe my time as maybe my advice to you is, my time is better served doing some research so that you can have some powerful conversation points. Leave the pitch materials as a follow-up after you meet with this person so that we can customize it based on how they answer these questions. Some of these questions that you might ask being, you know, asking them about what's important to them. What are their core issues and opportunities? I read, I saw, I heard that you and your organization are dealing with this. How does that impact you? So now you're encouraging your lawyers to be in coaching mode and not pitch mode, which is a little bit more of advising mode. What are the benefits of asking these questions first in this scenario rather than pulling the pitch together, especially if it's an urgent request? Yeah, well, the benefit is you might get them to realize that a pitch, bringing materials is not the appropriate thing to do, given how they answer these questions. And I'll have to hear from some of you, but typically what I experienced is there wasn't a lot of clarity around these questions in terms of the answers. So there wasn't a lot of knowledge of the individual except for some surface information around the individual, their role, their organization, where they work. So digging deeper into research will support your lawyer's better understanding of this individual they're going to speak so that they can have a more effective conversation. So even if it is urgent, and I've been there, I'm meeting a contact in, you know, it's 11 a.m. I'm meeting a contact for lunch at 12, pull together some pitch materials. I will get to this quickly. Okay, look, before I do that, I want to ask you a few key questions because I actually think I'm probably going to lean towards pulling some research for you so you have some conversation points versus pulling together pitch materials right now. Because it's probably not the right thing for you to start talking about you in this conversation. The right thing is probably for you to think about the questions you're going to ask that reveal issues, challenges, opportunities on the client or the prospect side. So sometimes in urgent situations, you can see what I did there. It's jumping between advisor and coach. And it's what you're going to have to do.
And Carmelo, can I just jump in here?
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I've experienced with this is you may not be able to address it that time, but you can tell them next time, you know, if you're able to give me a bit more notice, we can do X, Y, and Z to give you these answers. So using those sort of urgent things to kind of coach them, I guess, into behaving better next time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, this can be a tricky one because I've been there where you're really pressured to just pull together pitch materials. But here's where you know, the coaching, the only way to in my view, the only way to get your legal professional, if that's the person who's asking for this, to maybe not go in with, what I consider what can be a little bit of a roadblock to an open conversation is giving them pitch materials and talking to a contact about themselves and the firm, is engaging this perspective around, let's think through this. Let's if I only have 10 or 15 minutes, why don't we do some quick research together on screen and find some information that will give you some conversation points and use this as a follow-up, the pitch materials as a follow-up. Any other thoughts on this scenario in terms of how you might approach? Yes, I see for some of you this happens on a daily basis. I know we're almost at time, so I'm gonna jump a scenario that I think would also be relevant to many of you. I need your help with, here's another one, right? I need your help with, let's say, article, webinar, presentation. We talked about proposal. Well, let's say someone comes to you and says, I need your help with a new development. There's a new development, legislative development, marketplace development. We want to get out a blast to our email list. Okay, one of the things to think is start in coach mode to clarify objectives and get more details. So what is your objective with this initiative? Who's your target audience? What's important about this to your contacts? How do we know that this is the best format to reach your contacts? How will you have meaningful access to your contacts through this initiative or this format? I want to stop there and say the reason I suggest these questions is oftentimes what I used to see, and maybe some of you see this, is we'll have someone jump to the medium. I need to write something. I need to speak. I need to do whatever it is the format is. And I say before jumping to the medium and determining that medium is the initiative, the approach you should take, is taking a step back and saying some of these questions around who's your target audience, what's your objective, might reveal that, well, in fact, your target audience, this is not the way they consume information. This is not, or a networking event. This is not where they congregate for networking, for learning and development. A speaking engagement. Are you sure your target audience is going to be at your speaking engagement if you're going to do that? This is really about stepping back from the medium, going into coach mode to understand what the objective is, and then saying, given what you need, what your intention is here, given your target audience and my understanding of your target audience and the clarity around what it is they need, here is the best format, here's the best medium, here's the best approach. That's not to say that you might not take multiple approaches. So maybe it's taking one piece of content and amplifying it through different mediums, but it's just to say, don't jump to the medium, because our natural reaction is going to be to, okay, let me help you with that article. Let me help you get the mailing list ready. Let me help you with that webinar. When in fact, we might just take a step back and understand what's this about? And how are you going to have access to your contacts through this medium? Because if that's not clear, those are some of the questions we should be asking first. Yes, Ruth, you say those questions in scenario 3 should be standard operating procedure for any marketer. Absolutely. But again, sometimes in rush, urgent, we need to get this out, right? Sometimes we can compel to just jump into advisor mode. And so what I'm saying here, I know we're coming up on time. What I'm saying here is in these scenarios and in the conversations we're having is think about where you can at least initially bring in a coaching mindset, which is inquisitive, asking questions that reveal more about the initiative, the objective, the intention, the desire of the individual you're speaking to, so that you can more fully represent what they need, and more importantly, when you're talking about legal professionals, more fully represent what the external market, your clients, your prospects, and your referral sources need. I know we're at time, so I'm going to stop there and ask, are there any other questions before we come to a close?
I'll give people a couple of moments to just type anything in that if they still have burning questions. But I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think those questions, especially in the scenarios, are going to be so useful for people, especially if they're looking to reframe how they conduct themselves switching from that advisor to coach mode. I can see that Joyce has raised her hand. I am not sure if I can allow you to talk or not. Maybe, oh, we've got two people raising their hands. Morgan, do you happen to know in the background if you can let people talk? There we go. I think we've solved.
Hi.
Joyce.
Hi, Joyce.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm happy to stay on if everybody, whoever needs to jump off, go ahead. Go ahead, Joyce, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Carmelo. This is very, very informative. So it does relate to an earlier question. And I think it's really, my question is, how do you push past, I guess, like the threshold of, or the brink of coaching to advising? And in a particular situation, like it's just, you can't get past coaching, because if you continue to, in a particular situation, I can continue to coach a lawyer, but if I continue to, like play by their book, even after presenting a lot of information and asking them a lot of questions, sometimes they're just so stubborn. How do you convert that into, I guess, in an like a successful advisory scenario, if that makes sense?
Yeah, let me see if I understand, Joyce. Is that you're in coaching modes, you're being inquisitive, you're asking questions about a scenario, an initiative, an approach, a desire, and what you're thinking in the back of your mind as this is the way I would advise, but I'm in coaching mode right now, is you're saying they're coming up with a path or a solution that is not aligned with what makes sense. Is that what you mean?
Yes, basically. And you're going further and further in, say, a marketing strategy or a marketing plan. And they're just not doing exactly what you think is right. And you're giving all the coaching you can. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I'm going to say it's a hard question to answer, not in terms of, it's a hard question to answer in terms of I've been there. And so there are moments where, depending on the individual, you might just have to, and I hate to admit this, you might just have to do what they're thinking.
Okay.
I've been there, right? Is you're just going to have to get that article out. You're just going to have to pull this pitch together, this pitch material together. You're just going to have to do, because it's not, you're not getting the buy-in, you're not getting engagement you would expect. However, I think it goes back to what's in your control, Joyce, is if you're in coaching mode and you get them to a point where they have a bunch of scenarios, a bunch of different paths they can take, and that's where, if you do then switch to advisor mode and say, given my subject matter expertise, given my experience, given what I understand about the marketplace, given what I understand about our clients, all these different factors, this is the best path forward, given everything we've talked about here. They might end up, there's A, B, and C. A is the best path forward. They might say, well, I still want to do C. All you can control in that is, have you created the space for them to understand the relevance, the pros and cons of A, B, and C, and why A is the best path? And if they can't see it and there's no way for you to override their decision, then it might be C as the path, provided C is not detrimental.
Okay.
I always go back to, if C is not going to serve your external market the best, if that's not the optimal method and A is, there might be points where you have to push back and say, we actually can't do C, we can do B potentially, but A is really the approach and this is the reason. And this is where you might have to get, buy-in, approval from leaders, from more senior team members, depending on what the situation is.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Someone else have their hand up? We can't hear you, Catherine.
Sorry, I was saying thank you very much to Joyce, and asking Morgan if she had a question, because I can see her hand is raised. That may have just been helping out on the background. Okay, I'll leave her to to ask you directly. So if anyone does have any more questions, we will provide Carmelo's contact information in the post-event communication, which will have a recording and also some slides so that you can keep those questions on hand for your conversations. I'd just like to thank Carmelo very much for taking the time today to talk to us. I think it's been really insightful. Thank you very much to our sponsors, Key Media, and thank you very much to all of you for coming and joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at our summer social event. Details will be coming out shortly, and obviously on our next webinar, details will be coming out in a couple of weeks on that. I will leave Carmelo to have the last word.
Thank you, and thank you all. Thanks, Catherine. Thanks, team, for creating this opportunity. Yeah, I just want to say you're welcome. Thanks for all the positive comments in the chat box. Please reach out to me. You know, if I haven't answered your question, if you have additional questions, my email will be available. You can also please connect with me on LinkedIn and just let me know that this is our connection point. That this is how you heard of me. Although many of you already am connected to, but if I don't know you, please connect with me on LinkedIn and just let me know that you were part of this presentation and you'd like to connect. And I'm happy to answer any questions outside of this conversation. So thank you all.